So a couple of days ago, I developed these like blotchy spots, very painful, extremely painful, on my back and under my arm, like this area, the trunk area. The clothing, touching it was painful. Sitting, trying to move, all of those things were just painful. And this is on top of the other weirdness associated with the fistula trying to develop or trying to repair itself. This has been a weird 2 months, and 2020 has not necessarily been the greatest, at least on that front. Interestingly enough, with that, I didn't necessarily know what that was. I just knew it was painful. My wife saw it; she was horrified by it, and as she's talking to my mom throws out, "Is it shingles?" And my wife's, "That's so random." My wife looks it up and is like, "That's exactly what it is." Now, I had chickenpox when I was 8 or 9 years old. My mom and family decided to go on a boat trip. I was supposed to go on that boat trip, but not being bitter or not bitter, they left me, and they left me with chickenpox. Now, I even right now, I have a sore going all the way back from then when I was like 10 years old. Basically, from my understanding, chickenpox goes dormant, and at some point, for whatever apparent reason, pops out in the form of shingles. This has been a fucking insane 2 months, if not year. And this year's not over with. Right now, in the same way that that virus just kind of popped up and affected, this weird way that, something that you haven't dealt with for like 30, 40 years. Well, COVID-19 is also a virus. And it is also a virus that, in this case, is highly contagious. And this has been going on since February or March, I suppose. And people are sick of being in the house. I mean, basically, the lockdowns and the restrictions, the lockdowns are not there because they're just there. They are there for a reason of trying to depreciate the amount of people that are getting ill with the virus. And we're seeing an uptick, especially in the United States, but also in Europe. Despite that uptick, despite that virus being a real thing, despite authorities in the hospitals and others having to deal with that, especially if you get infected, you could pass it to me, even if you yourself are not symptomatic. Well, that demands the government to take certain actions. Those actions wouldn't necessarily be taken under normal circumstances, but given the condition and the threat, well, many of these governments in Europe and in the United States, well, they ban gatherings, or at the very least, they put in public bans. You have some people even arguing for a mask mandate federally in the United States. And I would suppose in the countries of Europe, they're probably talking about the same thing. Basically, the goal is to try to cut down the transmission numbers. People are going to get sick as a flat fact. But what you don't want is your hospitals to be overwhelmed and slammed to the point where those hospitals need to start rationing care. For example, like in Utah, where within a week or two, they're going to start rationing care as record numbers of COVID patients flood their hospitals and their ICUs. They were going to get to the point of basically having to get approval to help somebody. And the people who are getting worse may be the last for treatment. This is in America. Does it have to be this way? Of course not. Does the richest country on the planet have all the resources in the world to assure each and every hospital in this country is well stocked and well prepared? Yes, they do. Is that what the government is doing? No. No. Italy, they're trying to do something similar in regards to cutting down on the transmission. If you remember, Italy was one of those countries that was getting slammed prior. Well, again, virus, real thing, but people are sick of it. These are the protests that were taking place in Italy over the public shutdown. Again, virus is a real thing. People are dying from that virus. Hospitals are loaded. Governments take action to try to cut down the transmission. And people in Europe and even in the United States bitch, moan, and complain and say this is a trespassing on our rights and this is an authoritative government trying to take over. No, this is a government trying to deal with a health crisis. And in trying to deal with the health crisis, putting in certain measures to try to mitigate the transmission of that disease and deal with it in the degrees that you have it. Right now, in the United States, we've been seeing jumps from the standpoint of COVID-19. And yesterday was like the highest number since July, if I'm not mistaken, in regards to the number of people who are infected. Also, keep in mind, when there is an infection, death follows. Meaning, when you're looking at this from, let's say, a God's point of view, and you're looking at the stats, and in looking at those stats, you know enough to know that when there is a spike in the number of people who get COVID-19, within a few weeks, there tends to be a spike in the number of people who die. That's rational, right? It's a proportionality of it going up, meaning if you have more people who are infected, you have more of a chance for those people to die, either from the virus or for something else associated with the virus. I want to take a jump across the pond. And there is a new study that is out that throws flaming hot acid on any notion of herd immunity. Let the weak die off, as another word for it. That pretty much is destroyed in these studies. There's another story from Germany that apparently cooperates this study. But in this very specific case, they're doing a study on antibodies. And their question becomes, how long do the antibodies last in a person who was infected with COVID-19? Now, this also applies to the vaccine because they want your immune system to be able to basically create antibodies against the virus. Well, the results of that study are rather depressing. And I'm going to go through the study, or at the very least the basics of the study. If you're looking at this stuff from a God's perspective, and you can look at all of the countries, you can see how many people were dying in those countries. You can also see what those countries were trying to do to mitigate it. Well, in this very specific case, you have hospitals filling up, Midwest, the US, and Europe. And like you saw in those protests, there's some people who take it more serious than others. And even the people at the protests had sense enough to have a mask on. That said, you're not going to like the results of this study, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. And it has to do with your immunity and your ability to fight off this virus if you catch this virus. There's also a secondary question dealing with the antibody stuff on whether or not one strand of COVID affects the other. Meaning, if you get an antibody for a particular strain, if there's another strain, does an antibody work for that particular strain? My thought is it's probably like flu season, but we're going to have a doctor on tomorrow to talk about it. But if it's anything like the flu, where you catch it one year, they give you a shot or an antibiotic or a vaccine, and then the next year you can catch it again. In fact, you can even catch it that same year because it could be a different strand of flu. So the question becomes, how effective are the vaccines? How long does the antibody or the immunological effect last? And based on this study, and based on another study in Germany, not long. Meaning, the idea of herd immunity was absurd in the beginning. And the study, the other, makes it that much more absurd now. The study basically shows that immunology doesn't last long. And the antibody coverage pretty much dies off pretty quickly. Meaning, just because a person was infected, let's say 4 months ago, doesn't necessarily mean they can't be reinfected again. I'm going to go through the study. This is going to be a rough 2020 and 2021. And I put a pin in this video with me saying this because what is about to take place in regards to the election, the inequality gap, all of those things are going to culminate in somewhat of a chaotic year. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. I'm not going to keep this video long, but I've been covering COVID for a while now. And, even for the show, and I try to keep up on the latest research and information that comes out. One of the most interesting things that came out was basically the IQ of individuals who had the virus dropping. So weird. It's so bizarre. This is Reuters. Scientists at Imperial College London have tracked down antibody levels in British population following the first wave of COVID-19. So, COVID-19 goes to the community, ravages the UK, ravages the United States, ravages Italy, Spain. All of those countries get rocked by it. Germany also. So the question becomes, well, those people that got rocked by it, how many of those are immune to it right now? Meaning, how many of those have antibodies that was produced by having the virus? And how long did those antibodies last? Operative question. The study found that the antibody prevalence fell by a quarter from 6% of the population around the end of June to just 4.4% in September. So in spots where there were hot spots, you still found this drop in antibodies within the course of just a few months. That's 4 months? From quarter from the end of June, July, August, September. 3 months. Yeah, 3 months. In 3 months, the population, when measured for their immune system or their immunological effect, I guess the histocompatibility complex, this is about the ability to identify who you are versus something that's not you, drops severely in a very short period of time. Severely may be too strong, but definitely drops in a very short period of time. So right here, it says, although immunity to the novel virus is complex and murky, it may be assisted by the T cells as well as the B cells that can stimulate the quick production of antibodies following exposure to the virus. The researchers said the experience of other coronavirus suggests that immunity might not be enduring. Meaning, based on their experience with the previous ones, they thought this one also may not necessarily be enduring. We can see antibodies and we can see them declining, and we know that antibodies on their own are quite protective. Wendy Barclay, head of the Department of Infectious Disease at Imperial College of London, told reporters. On balance of evidence, I would say what we know for other coronaviruses, it would look as if immunity declines away at the same rate that antibodies decline away, and that this is an indication of a waning immunity at the population level. That's not good. That's not good. That means all of these people who get infected with this disease in a very short period of time can be reinfected with the virus. That's unfortunate. The study backs up findings from similar surveys in Germany, which found the vast majority of people didn't have COVID-19 antibodies, even in hotspots for the disease, and the antibodies might fade in those who do. So not only does it seem that people aren't either generating the antibodies or the population doesn't necessarily seem to have a lot of them, and apparently even in the people that do develop antibodies, within a short period of time, those antibodies basically leave or level off. That's unfortunate. Keep in mind, they're trying to put through a vaccine. The thought of the vaccine be it you can protect the individuals from this particular virus, especially when you don't necessarily want to deal with the consequences of that virus, meaning either inflammation issues associated with IQ, vision, smell, whatever. You don't want to deal with it. And so you try to avoid it. But at the very least, you would hope that some group in your society will have antibodies for it. Yeah, some of us do apparently, but apparently it's also fleeting. And again, the question becomes what happens if they do put out a vaccination. I guess my thought is, in the way that the flu mutates, the same expectation is probably going to be for this. And you're going to have people who are looking to make a ton of cash off of those vaccines. Not to mention, like I said, the virus mutates. I mean, even the virus that's here in the United States mutated from something else while it was in China and Europe. But nevertheless, ideally, hopefully, something comes up and to mitigate it. But right now, social distancing and masks seems to be the two main policies. Now, one last thing, we do get better at treating the virus. Meaning, even though the numbers of people who are dying seem to be going up, I mean, we're almost back to 1,000 people a day. The doctors themselves in the ICU, they're more prepared or better prepared to deal with the virus. Part of the problem that we were dealing with in the United States was watching science in action. Meaning, everybody loves science when I'm in the spaceship and I'm doing, 10G maneuvers and whatnot, trying to attack an alien who's trying to destroy Earth. Well, everybody loves science on that point. Oh, we like the lasers. We like the masers. We like the photons. We like all of it. Love all that stuff. We get to blow shit up. But the reality of it is, the science, that's well-worn science. Meaning that science where it's understood and you are manipulating the elements of our nature and our reality in order to create something else. Meaning I am transmuting X and all of these products into Y. And I'm doing it based off of some scientific principle that would allow this to work. Well, what happens in the beginning though? Something happens. And you're trying to figure out, okay, what's going on? And with the scientific method, you give a hypothesis. You try to do the experiment to either confirm or deny the hypothesis. And you move forward from there. Well, what happens when all of that stuff is happening at once? Where it's not just science in the conceptual sense, but science in an active sense, in practice. Doctors who are doing research on the virus, doctors who are trying to figure out how to mitigate people getting infected at the various hospitals, doctors trying to nail down epidemiological studies, and all of that stuff happening all at once. At the exact same time where the federal government was entirely ill-prepared to ensure that the hospitals and the doctors and the nurses and people had the protective equipment and the things that they need, forcing your medical system to basically curtail the truth on the issue of masks because your government didn't see to it that there were enough masks to go around. It's fascinating. It really is. But it's science in action. It's not science 20 years after. It's all of these experiments, all of these hypotheses, all of this research is taking place in the now. And you have some research that's trying to confirm other research. You have falsifiability that's part of the process. So if somebody says X works and you test it and you get 10 people doing 10 different studies, 2 says it works, 8 says it doesn't, well, the preponderance of the evidence is that it doesn't work. It's that type of stuff. But that stuff is going all at once. That's not a sexy process. That's sausage making. But that's science. It's not magic. It's trying to figure out how the world works, how to mitigate how the world works. And in this very specific case, from the standpoint of medicine, how to mitigate that virus and keep people alive, meaning increase the survivability of the virus. And so you would expect over time, over the course of several months or over the course of a year, they would get better at that. Meaning the number of people who are being infected and the number of people who are dying, there may be a trail off as we get better at treating. But right now, despite the improvements and enhancements in regards to our understanding of the virus, 884 deaths today. Yesterday, I think this says 529. If you trail this off, you get to see this basically number going higher. 442 2 days ago, 529 yesterday, 884 today. I could break this down by states, but basically you get my point. How we mitigate this. At this point, is somewhat unknown, but we do know the social distancing, the mask. Also, at some point, this stuff tends to die out. It becomes an issue of endurance, like any other illness. You just have to endure. The shingles thing, I don't like it. It's not sexy. Hurts. Again, weird, out the blue for these last 2 months. It just seems like, it's like reality just deciding, let's take the piss out of them. But it's something you just have to deal with. That's all. There's no magic. Endurance. You suffer through it. And in this case, we suffered through it together. Hopefully, there would have been competent leadership associated with it. But either way, we suffered through it together with the recognition that some of us are suffering more than others. And the idea of a vaccine and everything else, people are going to make a ton of money off of that. So I have no expectation that they won't push that hard. And whether it's a Democratic or a Republican administration, end up trying to get people the vaccine for free because, again, somebody's going to make a massive payday off of that vaccine and the subsequent vaccines. They're going to come year after year after year and towards the future. But either way, right now, that study is not something that people necessarily want to hear. Because at the end of the day, you would hope that if you went through a virus, like when I was talking to my wife, she said, that's the same virus that causes chickenpox. I said, well, I've had chickenpox. And she says, yeah, I know, but that's the second version of it. I was like, what do you mean the second version of it? And when I was doing research on it, this thing goes into your nerve cells and then pops out of your nerve cells. How weird is that? How bizarre is that? And so, when we're dealing with the COVID stuff, it's just something you have to endure. It's not something where you have a magic bullet where you can just get rid of it. And, like I said, they're trying to vaccines and everything else. But right now, based on the research that's out, it doesn't necessarily seem like the lifespan of the antibodies last that long. And clearly within the course of a season, a person can be infected and then get reinfected within the context of one season in the way that it seems like the antibodies are dying off. So I would imagine those vaccines are going to have an eye towards expanding the lifespan of the antibody protection. And that's probably where they're going to try to push it. So I'll leave this here. I don't want to keep this one long because I just wanted to give an update. Like I said, the COVID thing is something I tend to cover on the channel because I think it's vitally important. And there are consequences of this that are significant and severe. Think for the moment of a societal collapse. And think of the things that are prevalent in that. Low infant mortality rate, a division between the rich and the poor, a discrediting of the political structure, an inability of the political structure to deal with the basic problems that are availing a society, and the discrediting of it for not being able to deal with the problems that are, again, part and parcel to a society. The people who are being thrown out the streets. You're having all of these things that are taking place in the context of 200 or 300,000 people dead. What does society do to get rid of that energy that's there? Because I guarantee you, there's a potential energy that's there that is screaming to get out. And when it comes out, oh man, it is going to be a monster. Which is kind of my point of saying 2020 and 2021 are going to end up being hellish years, regardless of who wins the election. Bob Ramirez, see Dr. John Campbell's YouTube post today. I'll check it out. I will definitely check it out. Once Biden is in office, we can all breathe a sigh of relief. Yeah, I think I've read that one before. And the answer is no. This election is depressing. The one hope that I did have were the protests. Like, I thought that as bad as things were, that the protests will expand and expand beyond this idea of just race. That it's no longer white people who are out here fighting for blacks and Black Lives Matter and whatnot. But instead, it's people going out with this notion and a focus on class, inequality, and a demand for actual, real change. And again, that goes beyond the element of race. That's not what we got. And, I kind of made the point that the moment that the election is over with, if Biden wins, Black Lives Matter is going away. Nobody's going to hear about them for a while. Mark my words, he would use them up until the point of getting elected. But beyond that, a demand needs to be made. And demand needs to be clear enough and straightforward enough where there's no ambiguity within the context of the demand. If it's Medicare for all, talk about the letter of the law, meaning the bill itself. If it's elimination of student debt, none of this conditionality nonsense associated with it, any more than there's conditionality on public schools. I don't, there's no sigh of relief that we breathe at all in either situation. So I don't have a dog in the sun, and neither one of them are getting my vote. So I'll leave it here. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Thanks all. Turn the record player on. Right. AJC, turn the record player on. Gotta read them. Give them words. That's what you gotta do. Like, share, and subscribe. The death numbers are not inflated. If anything, they're underinflated. But I'll leave it. Like, share, and of course, subscribe.